Welcome back to Viewpoints, listeners. I'm your host, Henry Grossek. We're in the middle of a discussion on education, school education, and where it's heading and what can be done with David Roy, who's a senior lecturer in education at the University of Newcastle, New South Wales. Welcome back, David.
Hello. Thanks, Henry.
Rearranging the education chairs on the Titanic. That's quite a colourful metaphor.
Well, education in Australia has got a few challenges going on. We're not going at the level that we potentially should be, given some of the financial investment that's being put in. When you look at the highly qualified trained staff that we've got, we are a very rich nation in comparison to so many. We're not a large nation,
No.
and so we could actually really pull together. And yet we seem to be this wonderful ship that is slowly sinking in our areas of achievement in multiple areas, whether it's through the mental health of our students, through to the literacy and numeracy, or science, or the academic elements, or the role within the arts, or any aspect. So we're rearranging, we're doing things, but we don't seem to be going forward. We just seem to have hit an iceberg.
Now, fair point. Now, you focus on the fundamental problem lying in the system in part of that piece, explaining the polarisation of debate about it and that being unhelpful. You might like to explain that.
Well, I do truly believe that our system has got challenges, but we're not doing anything significantly to change the system. Although we are now doing much more group work and project-based work, basically when you walk into a classroom, in most classrooms in a school in Australia, you could take a photograph and then compare it to a photograph from 100 years ago, and the blackboard has been replaced by the pixelated digital board. But the book might have been replaced by the iPad, but we're basically still doing the same things. And I would argue that if we want to see fundamental change, we need to fundamentally change everything. And that includes the system and the way we organise education. Because that's happening in other countries, and that's the really scary thing for governments, because they run those systems, and those systems are quite comfortable, and I don't think we should be setting all the onus onto teachers and to kids. I think there's ways that we teach, ways that we organise classrooms, of one teacher to 25. I just think collaboration is a way to go. I'd love to see 2 teachers to 15. These are fundamental changes, the way we design buildings and the way that we invest our society's money in education. And we do not spend a lot of money on education in comparison to our wealth that we spend in other areas.
No, it's a good point. Some of what you said also reminded me of books that I read when I was doing my master's degree, David, and that was the factory model of education. Have we moved very far from that?
Well, I mean, I think the factory model idea is actually kind of correct, that we do still have that. I think it's kind of used in a slightly facetious way, that we're going to have to always organise classes and groupings in some way. So saying because it's by their made-by date is kind of slightly immature. But at the same point, we do kind of want to churn out students with a Year 12 certificate in whichever state you're in, and that then leads you to university. And it is almost like a factory line pushing through to some end goal. One of the interesting things that I've been looking at recently is that within primary and secondary, we're outcomes focused. We look at the outcomes document, and that dictates what we then do. And it kind of is teacher-led being done to kids. When you look at the things such as the early learning framework that came out for early childhood, that's a framework which gives more freedom, and it's more about the kids rather than what is done to them, but what they're doing. And I partly wonder if we need to be looking at that framework concept, at least more in primary, if not in a bit of secondary as well. as they are starting to do in some of the other nations.
We've just been through our school review, our 4-year school review down here in public schools in Melbourne, David, and an interesting thing which does raise a lot of debate, I sort of acknowledge it in the piece I sent to you, and that is that school reviews down here cover all aspects of how the school operates and whatever it achieves, but NAPLAN results have tripled the weighting of everything else. What's your view on that?
Listen, we need to have assessment tools to see how kids are doing. We've always done that. We assess things all the time when we eat, when we drive, whatever we're doing, we assess. So that's good. But it should be a tool. It should be for the teacher and for the kid and the parent. It shouldn't be published. It shouldn't become high stakes. And we sometimes over-formally test rather than trust the experience and judgment of teachers. Because teachers, if they're any good, are assessing kids every 2 minutes in their head about how they're working and developing and assessing themselves. And one of the things that we have another issue with is this binary again. Should we be teaching skills or and capabilities, or should we be teaching knowledge? Well, why can't we do both? You cannot just teach knowledge because you need to apply it, which requires skills. You cannot have skills if you've got no knowledge to use with those skills. So teaching skills and knowledges are both equally important. How we assess, I'm a great believer in continuous assessment. I think it's much more threatening to kids in a fun way. At times, society has to some way of measure that kids have achieved certain targets. Leaving it all to year 12 is the main one, but putting multiple stresses every 2 years across the way with no takeaway for the kids. And it's 6 months out of date anyway when they get the result. I'm not sure how beneficial that is.
Talking about the challenges of binary focus on outcomes, I can remember in the 70s one of the most wasteful and least productive polarising conversations we had, and it distracted us from what we were doing, was the debate about whether we should have whole language or phonetic approach to the teaching of reading. And I think we spent 20 years distracted by that debate, and I don't think the kids benefited from it at all, David.
And it's back. The same argument has come back. Well, the way I look at it is, for some kids, phonics can be really useful.
Yep.
Some whole word can be really useful. For some kids, it's different things again. It's listening to words. Others, it's reading the words or visually seeing them somewhere. There's multiple methodologies, and the best teachers use them all and see each kid as an individual rather than saying there's a one-size-fits-all. So there's multiple things like this. We need to stop saying there's an answer. There's not an answer. There's multiple ways that need to be applied. And again, we're still doing little tinkerings like these within the same system, 20 kids sitting in a classroom with one teacher who is the fountain of knowledge. And I think life has moved forward from that.
Absolutely. David, time's got away from us. It's been an absolute pleasure. What you've done is you've provoked me into giving you an invitation to come back on Viewpoints whenever you've got time, because education is my passion, and there's so many things and so much great things you're doing that I'd love to have share them with all of our listeners.
Well, listen, I would be most happy to do so. It's just a voice to stimulate thought. It's not a voice of answers. I will learn new things in the next hour. We all will change and develop, and we should be willing to do that and listen to each other.
Refreshing to have an educator of that perspective on my program and also within my earshot, David.
Thanks, Henry. It's been great speaking.
Wonderful. That was David Roy, listener, Senior Lecturer in Education at the University of Newcastle, New South Wales, and a refreshing voice in education. He's been around a while, but he's a refreshing voice, and he'll certainly be back in the near future. We'll take a short break. Don't go away.